Let's cut to the chase, have an honest conversation, and develop real answers. As a matter of fact, with Andrew Cuomo.
Halloween week, and it was truly frightening. More signs that our democracy is deteriorating before our eyes. Elon Musk and Twitter decide we don't have enough inflammatory hate speech on our social media. Speaker Pelosi's husband, Paul, was attacked in his home with a hammer. The media offers widely different accounts of the attack on the Pelosis, and of course, conspiracy theories abound. American chaos continues, so trick or treat. And the midterms are coming up. You can't turn on the news without hearing predictions from pundits about what's going to happen, what the issues are, and how people feel. There are surveys, there are polls, there are focus groups. What's interesting is that almost everybody has said the same thing. The Democrats were looking unbeatable when the Supreme Court shocked the country with its decision to roll back Roe v. Wade, and then doubled down by rolling back basic gun protections on concealed carry for handguns. And then they signaled that marriage equality could be in question. Now the pressing issues have shifted to inflation and crime. And that shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Each time you pull up to a gas pump, you are reminded. Every trip to the grocery store, you are reminded. Inflation smacks you in the face every day, and you feel it in your wallet. Crime and violent crime is seemingly all we ever hear about in the news. Reports say crime has spiked across the United States, and the American people are feeling less and less safe. Joining me now is a legend in law enforcement, Ray Kelly. From 1996 to 98, Ray Kelly was Undersecretary for Enforcement at the United States Department of the Treasury. In that post, he supervised the department's enforcement bureaus. That's the Customs Bureau, the Secret Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF. He's also the longest-serving commissioner in the history of New York City Police Department. He did 2 terms under 2 different mayors. I've had the opportunity to work with Commissioner Kelly in a number of capacities. We were both in Washington together during the Clinton administration. And I've been on Air Force One with Ray and in the White House, in the Oval Office, all these different grand settings. But the picture that comes to my mind about Ray, and I've shared this story with young people who I talk to. 2012, Superstorm Sandy hit the Northeast and really was devastating to New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. And the city was half underwater, power was out. It was really chaotic. And when a city, you turn the power off in a city and there's flooding and people are scared and nervous, things can get out of hand relatively quickly. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm out in the Rockaways, which is in Queens near the ocean. And there was a lot of flooding in the Rockaways because it was close to the ocean. And there were some communities that had high crime rates in the Rockaways. And it's about 1 o'clock, and it's all the lights are out, and it's dark, and it's almost a surreal setting. And I see 2 people walking down the block. And I'm just watching them walk down the block. There's no lights, and they're getting closer, and they're getting closer. And as they get closer, I recognize that it's Ray Kelly. So I walk over to Ray. He was with his son. And I said, Ray, how are you doing? How's everything look? What are you doing here? And Commissioner Kelly said, I just am taking a look around. I want to make sure everything's okay. And I thought to myself, here you have the police commissioner of the city of New York. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. He could be home in bed. He could have gone out to dinner with his son. He could have been in a police department helicopter flying around New York City and looking down from a helicopter. But that's not Ray Kelly. He's out there walking the streets. No fanfare, no press, no entourage, because that's how he does the job. And that's a powerful story about Ray, but I use it with young people to make a story suggesting you want to be a success at a profession. You have to do it with passion. You have to do it honestly. You have to do it with sincerity, authenticity. And you have to be able to walk the walk. And that is Ray Kelly. So, Ray, thank you very much for being here. Here's my first. With you. Thank you, Ray. Here's my first question to you. It feels like crime is getting worse in many cities across the country. In Los Angeles, the main issue in the mayoral race is all about crime. There's been a lot of talk about it in Atlanta, et cetera. You have the migrant issue, you have the homeless issue, you have a quality of life issue. I was in New York City, I was in an Uber, and the Uber driver, 60-something years old, New York City boy, Manhattan, born and raised. And I said, how bad is it? And he said, worse than ever. I said, no, it's not worse than ever. It's not the 80s with the chain snatching and you were petrified to get on a subway. And he said, no, Governor, it's worse than ever. So that is the perception. I'm wondering, what's your take of it? You've seen it, you've seen the cycles. Is it the perception or is it the reality, Ray? How bad is the situation as you look at the conditions across the country?
Well, first, let me point out that on your Hurricane Sandy mention of me, you were there. The governor was there at 1 o'clock in the morning on the ocean. So that's some comment about you and your hands-on approach to the job. So the question of, is it real or is it somewhat of a myth? No, it's real. And obviously in some places it's going to be more of a problem than other places. In New York City, we've seen index crime, which is the crimes reported to the federal government. It's now up about 30%. And a good thing is that shootings are down and murders are down. But the mugging crimes, the ones on the street, are growing. They're high. And people talk about a brazenness where police are not around and people are getting robbed in broad daylight. So I think variations of this are happening in many major cities in America. It's not totally uniform, but certainly in New York, I see it as a reality. You talk to people, they talk to me. I can do nothing about it, but the subways, they're concerned about the subways. You know, we had 25 people pushed on the tracks this year alone in New York City. So, perception is a reality. If in fact it's perception some places, well, that's what people are concerned about. But, this is the world in which we live. I think a lot of this happened as a result of the death of George Floyd, where we had a sea change in law enforcement and policing. Almost immediately, the next day, actually, the night of the death of George Floyd, demonstrations happened in New York and happened all over the country, and actually happened all over the world. And the police were blamed for everything. I think a lot of people saw what Derek Chauvin was doing to George Floyd, and it confirmed suspicion. And he said that this is what cops do when they're not in the public eye. Of course, somebody was taking a picture of what was happening. It was pretty silly, but it was suspicions confirmed, and it was just incredible. The turnout of demonstrations, of violence attended to it. Cops were put on their back foot. As a result of the death of George Floyd, legislation happened throughout the country to restrict, to reduce the ability of the police to engage. Cops have a lot of discretion. What they did was pull back, and we're still experiencing that. They're not engaged in proactive measures that we know what that is. And in New York, as I said, cops are hemorrhaging. They're leaving, and I think it's getting to a crisis point because they have difficulty in hiring people. So, to answer your question, I believe it's reality. The numbers show that it's reality, and even if it is perception in some places, that amounts to reality in their minds.
Yeah. Ray, you bring up a good point about George Floyd and the aftermath of his death. We've always talked about police-community relations, right, going back to the 60s, and how do we improve that? And a lot of different commissions, a lot of different agencies have been set up, police, community relations, complaint boards, et cetera. But George Floyd, it took it to a totally different situation. I understandably, there was outrage at George Floyd, but I think your point is well taken. The flip side is the police saw these new laws, saw these new regulations in public-private. Everybody has a cell phone now. Everything you do is, you have to assume, is being recorded, right? Has that had a continuing effect on the police and their ability to do their job, or their willingness to do their job?
Yes, their willingness to do the job, I think, is the right phrase, because they see themselves at great risk of losing their job or being disciplined if they take aggressive action. So, as I say, they've got a lot of discretion, and they've decided not to engage in a lot of situations that they believe will be detrimental to their career. Now, it's not happening everywhere, but it's a big city phenomena for the most part, and that's why you see, like in 2020, you saw 12 major cities in the United States set a record for murders, and murders in the U.S. went up 30%. So, yeah, the cops are holding back. And also going along with this is, as I said before, the leaving of their police jobs, some to get other police jobs and what they consider more friendly environments, and some just retiring. Yeah. It's not what they signed on for. So they're out of the business. And as I say, it creates a real world problem, almost a crisis now in New York.
Yeah. And I agree, it's a big city issue, but the big cities are where the media tend to be located. So in terms of perception, if it's happening in LA and it's happening in Chicago, it's happening in New York, it's happening in Atlanta, et cetera, that's then in the media, that's what you see on the 6 o'clock news, that's what you see in the newspaper, and people get a sense that it's a nationwide problem. When it is, by the numbers, more a big city issue and then the surrounding suburbs. Here's my next question. You have magic wand, okay? President Biden says, you, Ray Kelly, you are the federal czar of criminal justice law enforcement for the nation. And your task is to turn around the crime issue in places like LA, New York City, the big cities. It's an impossible job, but you've made a career out of doing impossible jobs. Mm-hmm. Where do you start? Where do you start, Ray? How do you get your arms around this?
Well, first of all, crime fighting, in my judgment, is almost totally a local obligation. The federal government has money, and that's really the tool that you can use. So what I would do is look at these regulations and rules that I said have been put in after George Floyd to restrict the police. One of the ones that bothers them the most in their unions is the elimination of the qualified immunity defense for police officers. This is a concept that grew out of court decisions in the late 60s that applies to every civil servant. Now, what has happened is in New York and other places, they have prevented or put in laws that prevent police officers from using qualified immunity as a defense. So in their minds, they're thinking if I get sued, I can get sued personally, and I can potentially lose my house, or that is out there as a concern on the part of police. So I would try to look at the universe of these laws and try to roll them back. Some of them are just sort of silly. To give a signal to police officers that we are, we're getting serious about it. And we realize there's been some overreaction. And the other thing I would do is look at giving bonuses to police officers, to either recruits or to police officers in their departments to stay. As I say, that's a major tool that the federal government has. And we need to do something here in New York to attract young people to become police officers. And it's just not happening anywhere near the numbers that are needed to backfill, people that are just going out the door. Nothing really has changed in the last couple of years that is going to encourage police officers to stay, if in fact they want to leave. The Civilian Complaint Review Board in New York has been given an awful lot of power, and they can initiate their own cases. And again, I just want to get back to the discretion issue. Police officers have an awful lot of discretion. They can hold back. They can wait a minute or two before they respond on a radio call or before they get involved in a fight, that sort of thing. So it's difficult to measure, but it's definitely there. So in federal level, I would look to roll back qualified immunity and some other restrictions, and give the cities hiring bonuses. One of the problems in New York, of course, is virtually every other civil servant in New York's salary is tied in some way, shape, or form to the police salaries. So it's not an easy task, I know, but that's just two things that I would look to do.
Last point is this. I say to my daughters all the time when they suggest that I'm overly opinionated, I say, it's not my opinion or that I know better than you. I just have lived it already. I've seen the movie. We have seen this movie in New York City. We've seen high crime. We've seen the fear of the subway. We've seen homelessness. And you were there when it turned around, right? Because New York City was on the brink and it turned around. So I take solace in that fact, Ray. It's not an impossible task. We have been here before. We resolved it, and we can do it again. But we have to do it. Would you agree with that?
I would. And just as you said, we were proud of the fact that we were the safest big city in America. We were putting that out for years. All of a sudden, it turned around. And it's not easy to get back on track, but it has been done. And I submit that some of the things that were done during the years where crime was reduced significantly have to be revisited. As you said, everybody has a camera. They're in stores, they're in people's homes, and of course they're wearing them around their neck. So that is a safeguard, and that is something for people who are concerned about overreach on the part of the police to sort of factor in. We see virtually every crime that's reported on television. We have a video of, which is incredible. We never had that. So people are seeing it vividly, on their home screens. But you're right, we've lived it, and it can be done again. We need the right people in a position to make that happen.
Well, Ray, thank you very much. Tell me the next time you're going out to the Rockaways at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'll take a ride with you. Thank you very much. Thank you for everything you've done for this country and this city. You really are a model of what public service is all about. So thank you, and God bless, Ray. Thank you.
I think it was our high school that did it. High school.
I think that's right.
Archbishop Malloy.
That's right. We're on the Hall of Fame and Archbishop Malloy.
We are. All the best, Governor.
All the best. It's my pleasure now to be joined by Dr. Frank Luntz. Dr. Luntz is a political consultant, strategist, researcher. He's been doing it for a long time. He advises political candidates, advises corporations on strategic determinations. He does a lot of work with focus groups where he actually puts people in a room and talks to them and talks them through issues. So you get a depth of a sense of how they're feeling and what's driving their decisions. Dr. Luntz, let me ask you this. The conventional political wisdom now is sort of binary. If the issues are social issues, abortions, marriage equality, guns, then if those are the issues when somebody walks into the booth, that's good for the Democrats. If the issues are about crime and inflation, that's going to be good for the Republicans. And it seems like whereas the abortion issue was really predominant right after the Supreme Court, that those issues tend to be waning, and the crime and inflation issues tend to be ascendant. I think that's a fair recitation of the conventional political wisdom. But where do you think we are now, and what do you think is going on?
I think that, and by the way, please call me Frank. I will still call you governor because in my mind, you're governor, but I'm just Frank. And I think you need to add one more point to that. I agree with that. And we see it happening. And abortion has not been talked about for the last few weeks. You've seen Republicans rise. Republicans had a tremendous lead 6 months ago. But then Roe v. Wade, the overturning of that happened, the Dobbs decision. And you watch Democrats get activated all across the country, particularly younger women. There are other counterbalances to that. But it's also, are you talking about Donald Trump or are you talking about Joe Biden? And it's amazing to me that it's been 2.5 years, 2 years since the election, and we're still talking about Donald Trump today after having him lose, and lose quite soundly. If you're talking about Trump, Democrats are winning because independents can't stand him and want something different. If you're talking about Joe Biden, Republicans are winning because they don't feel like he's done for them what he promised to do. And what I try to explain is that Mar-a-Lago raid, which is not high on anyone's list for being important, actually energized the Republicans because they believe that they've been victimized, that they've been targeted for prosecution, and that the Biden administration has really blown it in what it could have done to reach across the aisle. Not a single member of the cabinet is Republican, not a single advisor in Biden's senior staff is Republican. There is no voice for that 47% of the population. The president keeps saying that he's a president of the whole country. Well, if you're African American, you feel included. If you're a woman, you feel included. If you're a Republican, you feel like you've been left aside. And he could have done better. And I want to give you credit for two things at the outset. That you did listen. You and I will disagree on a lot, but you did listen to what the Republicans had to say. And your briefings during COVID were about COVID rather than about you. And in fact, I would watch the briefings side by side, and it was night and day. Donald Trump was all about insulting people in the press, and you were all about delivering information to the public. And it's one of the reasons why the public doesn't trust government anymore, because they think that too many politicians are about themselves rather than about solving the challenges that face the country.
Yeah, thank you for that, Frank. And I do believe there is a ray of light in those COVID briefings, because yes, I'm a Democrat. I'm a well-known Democrat. I'm a Northeastern Democrat, right, which brings its own baggage with it. I'm a quote-unquote liberal Democrat.
But you're not a California Democrat.
I'm not a California Democrat. But during those COVID briefings, we had millions and millions of viewers, not just across the country, across the world, actually. And it didn't matter Democratic, Republican, Independent. I separated very carefully fact from opinion. I would literally say, I want to give you the facts. Okay, now I want to give you my opinion. And it was a simple device, but it actually worked because people took the information as factual information as opposed to filtered through a political media or filtered through a political network. And even though I was a Democrat, I think people actually accepted the information as factual. And that gave me hope, right? My whole life has been about public service and hoping that people believe in government. I saw a glimmer of hope that people can actually respond in a nonpartisan way if they believe there's an honest conversation on the facts. Do you think that's right, or do you think I'm being too Pollyannish?
No, I think that's right. But when we did, I was doing focus groups. I did them online. And what people appreciated the most is that you had experts there, and you would bring the experts in, and you answered the more political questions. They answered the questions about the science and about the health. And so they saw that delineation, and we did not get that nationwide. And I think that if we'd done that approach, we would not have had such a high degree of vaccine deniers or and such a polarization around that issue. And that's probably the greatest challenge that we face today. And it's a challenge that you can address easier in this position than you could when you were governor, which is, how do we get people not to talk to each other, because that's easy. How do we get people to listen to each other and learn from each other? We're all in transmit mode when we really need to be in reception mode.
Yeah, good point. Let me ask you this. It seems to me that the Republicans' situation is all of their own making, right? The Republican Party for many, many years cultivated the pro-life movement, which they believe vehemently. But when the Supreme Court came out with the abortion decision, it then mentioned gratuitously that they may overturn the marriage equality decision. They made decisions on concealed carry of guns, which are highly problematic for urban areas. Affirmative action now. It seems like these issues have all been brought to the surface by the Republicans. And to the extent they are now battling them back, they're the ones who raised the issues in the first place. And you want to talk about crime and people being under attack. They're attacking women. They're attacking the LGBTQ community. They're attacking black and brown community with affirmative action. People who are concerned about gun safety. You still can't come up with any basic real agreement on guns. They passed the bill, but to me it was virtually irrelevant. And they say, well, people are afraid about crime. I think people are afraid of the Republican Party taking away their rights.
But and all you have to do is look at the results in the House, which is the people's House. And which we're filming this exactly 1 week before the election. I don't know when it drops, but I think that the Republicans are going to win a majority of the House seats, and I think it's going to be a clear majority. And so I'm not sure that I don't believe that population speaks to this. But your own mayor in New York, Mayor de Blasio, launched issues that even New Yorkers had a problem with. That it seemed like you didn't have any rights if you're from Manhattan because you're from a wealthier borough. That he focused on the outer boroughs to prioritize. The schools are worse in New York City. The crime is worse in New York City. The level of how people treat each other is worse in New York City. And de Blasio was mayor for 8 years? So Republicans have their extremists. Democrats have their extremists. And we need to find people that want to get things done that want to cooperate. It does not mean compromise, because that word compromise is not a popular word. Democrats want Republicans to compromise. Republicans want Democrats to compromise. But everybody wants cooperation and collaboration. And I don't think it helps us to promote the extremists when the average American who will watch this podcast will want people to work together, which you had a record of, but your mayor in New York did not.
Yeah. Frank, this is what
I know you agree. I don't know if you'll say it, but I know you agree with this. And I actually believe, and this is why I was so excited to do this, is because I've been freed to speak the truth. I don't feel like I have to follow a party line. So I've been challenging the Republicans and the election deniers and the extremists and their focus on social issues when the American people are focused on economic issues. And I'd say to you that you should do the same thing. Because
Frank, I am there. I'm there 100%, and I agree with everything you just said. My question was a leading question to you on the Republicans. I believe the far right has pulled the Republican Party too far to the right, and now they have their own problem. I believe the Democrats are pulled too far to the left by the left extremists who are unrealistic, they are unreasonable, and they're irresponsible. And they're pulling the moderate Democrats to the left because the moderate Democrats are afraid of them in a primary election. Yep. And that's the almost bizarre nature of this. On both sides of the aisle, they're afraid of the extreme because the extreme is small, tiny but mighty, and powerful in a primary election because they're the party base that turns out. So they bend over backwards to take care of the extremists in their party, which then makes them virtually unelectable in a general election.
Exactly.
But we keep repeating that pattern.
But the reason why we're repeating is social media. That social media rewards those who are more extreme. So we've been having about a 15-minute conversation, and neither of us has said anything that's worthy of going viral because we're actually somewhere in the center, or at least we're trying to be productive. Those politicians who own the social media by seeking to own the other side, they're the problem. But you can't regulate them because we have a constitution with freedom of speech. And you're not going to change the rules of social media because you have to protect freedom of speech. I'm watching right now Elon Musk, and I think he's got off to a bad start because he seems to be anti-democrat. I don't mean Democrat as in democracy, but playing the role of a partisan. What we really want from social media is the truth. What we really want from cable news is the truth. The problem is we seek our news to affirm us rather than to inform us. And that's part of what's destroying democracy.
Yeah. I'll say something that'll be controversial. I agree that social media influences the politicians. I can't tell you how many politicians would call me up. Somebody just tweeted this about me. By the way, I wouldn't look at Twitter because I believe it was such a perverse universe and influence. But yes, it affects the politicians. It goes viral within that closed loop, and the politicians are living in that closed loop. But Frank, it also affects the media because we have a media now that is catering to the conservatives, catering to the liberals, catering to this side and that side. And when they see the social media base that are their constituents, where they're looking for clicks, go a certain way on an issue, I think that influences their coverage on the issue. And that's frightening to me.
I can prove it, actually. I can prove it in sports. I work with a number of coaches of NFL teams, and the NFL the people who cover football do not follow politics. So I could sit in on their press conferences and no one knew who I was. And I'd get there 5 or 10 minutes before the coach would show up after the game. And I would listen to the reporters talk to each other about clickbait. They would have a strategy for how they were going to dominate the clicks. And it was always negative. They found that they could get 3 times as many viewers, as many clicks, by writing something negative about the coach than writing something positive. So it was just a determination of what negative to write. And that's horrible because they're not trying to write the truth. They're not trying to communicate something that actually happened. They're simply doing it for their own benefit at the expense of the knowledge and wisdom of the fan, of the reader. And it's the same thing in politics. But someone like you, your responsibility is to challenge it. Your responsibility is to say, I'm not going to play that game.
No, I agree. And I do. But by the way, the press doesn't like to be challenged. You know, I've been at this a long time. At one time, you could call a reporter and you could talk about coverage and talk about the facts. And you got this right, you got this wrong. I want to talk to you about this. Those days don't exist. The media doesn't like to be challenged. The old expression, don't fight with people who buy ink by the barrel, a lesson that I never learned, and frankly, a lesson that I will never learn until they put me in a box. Because the day you stop holding the press accountable for accuracy and truth is a day democracy starts to die. But I do challenge it. This whole social media, though, and the pressure on the media to get clicks, that comes down from the management now. They say to these columnists and these reporters, we want stories that generate clicks. We're in business and we need clicks. And you're right, the negative always sold better than the positive. Hate and anger is much easier to communicate than love and compassion. That's always been the case. But I've never seen it to this extreme, where you have a polarization of the media. It's all self-reinforcing. I'm a Democrat. I'm going to read the Democrat newspaper. I'm going to watch the Democrat news channel, and it just affirms what I believe and demonizes those who are on the other side. And I think that's continually driving the division.
So I'm going to give you a challenge, and this is what I would do as a political consultant, as an advisor, and I invite you to duck the question. It's a great question, and it's the humility question, because it's the thing that the public says politicians need to have more of. If you were to pick one mistake, and you don't have to answer because this is your podcast, but I would encourage you to do so, and you can do anything in me, because I can tell you what mine is. If you look back and say, my biggest the thing I regret the most politically, what would that be?
The thing I regret the most, macro, is not getting more done. We got a lot done. New LaGuardia Airport, marriage equality, minimum wage. But government is such a phenomenal opportunity to make real change that affects millions of people. And I'm proud of what we did, but I actually wish that we got more done. And also in the doing, Frank, it put me in an adversarial position with the legislature and the political establishment because I was constantly pushing them. The legislature is, they don't like to take tough votes, what they call tough votes. But all the difficult issues are tough votes. There's no 90-10 issue. It's 60-40, it's 70-30. And the way I got these things done was I used my political power to pressure the legislature to vote. And they resented it over time. I was the executive. I believed it was my job. But I don't even have an answer to that riddle. If I got things done because I pressured the system to get them done, but pressuring the system creates resentment, is there a way to get things done and get them to yes on difficult issues without pressuring them, that's a riddle I still haven't solved. But macro, I wish I got even more done.
And I've got a follow-up. I'm going to slip for 5 seconds so you all see that this is done without editing. I need to plug in my computer, which is right here. So what would you have done differently strategically as you look at this? How would you have handled it? I'll give you my example, is that I wish I'd spoken up earlier about what I saw happening to the country. Because if I had, I would have been able to live with myself. I had a stroke on the 10th of January of 2020, and I believe I had it because I was so frustrated about the way things were going, and I simply didn't have the guts to, and I was speaking out, but not enough. What would you have done differently, knowing what you know now about that would have brought a better outcome for you?
Yeah, I would have worked harder to get more things done that are.
But how? But how?
You know, I don't know how exactly, because I work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But I'm a big believer that when people see government accomplishments, it gets past a lot of the cynicism. We built a new LaGuardia Airport in New York, right? You now land in a new airport, you see a new airport, and you say, wow, government works, right? We passed the minimum wage law. Millions of people who were getting paid minimum wage went from $9 to $15. Wow, government made a difference. So more of those accomplishments that actually affect people's lives. I wish I had found the formula to accomplish even more of those.
In the end, and as a pollster, this is what I have to do. I have to dig deeper and deeper. It's like an onion. And I tell people that I approach every day like a jigsaw puzzle. And it's a different set of puzzle. Some days my puzzle's only 50 pieces and I can put it together in the first hour. Sometimes it's 5,000 pieces. They all look the same and it's a nightmare to get it done. But I'm always trying to figure out that what I did right, what I did wrong. Did you find, because you were governor for a while, you were a very successful politician. Did you find that you analyzed at the end of the day what went right, what went wrong, and changed your approach? Did you have a particularly consistent approach that did you well day in and day out?
No, Frank, I recalibrated. I was governor almost 12 years. So I recalibrated because the situation changed, right? The political environment would change over those years. And I would recalibrate with that changing political landscape. But I've never seen this landscape. 1994, the Newt Gingrich revolution was probably the most dramatic landscape shift. And I'm just trying to gauge if that's what's happening here. What do you think happens with the Senate, Frank?
You can't call it because, and there are 3 Senate races that I'm watching every single day. And in fact, I've been to all 3 states to try to understand them. The Nevada Senate race, which gets the least publicity because it's the smallest state, but their polls close at 11 p.m. and they may be the last to actually call who won or who lost. The Republican is up by 2 points. That's a democratically held state. If you get a Republican gain there and everything else stays exactly the same, Republicans take over the Senate. But the other 2 that are much more in focus, the race in Georgia with Herschel Walker and his background, and the conflict that Republicans have in that state between wanting to take a majority in the Senate versus wanting to vote for someone that they can be proud of. And the 2 are not necessarily simultaneous. And then in Pennsylvania, where the Democratic candidate is clearly physically impaired, did not have a good debate, and the Republican is clearly controversial. And it was a very highly watched, highly commented exchange. That helped Dr. Oz assume a very small lead. But I've been through this before. And it was your dad in 1994, and you won't know this. In fact, I'm going to share a story with you that you won't know that connects. I did not want Giuliani to support your father. I wanted him to stay with the Republicans. And so his media consultant blocked me from, this is before cell phones, I couldn't call him directly, blocked every meeting that I tried to have as Rudy was considering whether or not to endorse that Governor Cuomo. And he did make the endorsement. And all these votes, because Rudy was respected, all these votes shifted. And your father went ahead by a reasonably good number. Here's the problem. He did it too early. They thought that if you waited to about 10 days out, that would be the perfect amount to get people to consider voting to reelect the governor. What happened was all these votes swung. And then after 3 or 4 days, they began to swing back again. If Rudy had made that endorsement the Friday before the election, your father would have been reelected, even with this Republican landslide. But because it was 10 days before, it was too soon. And so I'm wondering, in this debate in Pennsylvania, all these votes swung from Fetterman to Oz, but it may have been too far before Election Day, and those people may swing back before it's time to vote.
Well, it's going to be an interesting one, Frank. Let's get through Election Day. I'd love to have you back, and we'll talk about what happened. But thank you very much for taking the time to be with me. It's a pleasure. I've always respected you and your work, and I love being able to talk to you about it.
Well, I wish we could have done this years ago. I'm grateful for doing it now. And if there's anything I can ever do, you're a very special family. You're a very special governor. We probably would disagree on 80% of policy, but I appreciate you, I value you, and I truly, truly respect you. So this is a privilege for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frank. Have a good day. Thank you. Now we're going to go to the real experts. And the real experts, in my opinion, are the people on the streets of the city of New York. They will tell you the truth, whether or not you want to hear it, and they will tell you directly. We call it New York blunt, and I love it. So let's go out and talk to some of the people of New York City and find out what's really going on.
It's so nice to
Nice
meet
to see
you.
you.
Oh
Take
my
a picture
goodness.
with us in it. I'm
We
here.
miss you.
You never left. What's the number one issue that's going to drive how you vote?
Honestly speaking, as a New Yorker, born and raised, crime. The
Crime.
city is getting out of hand.
How long have you been in the city?
I've lived here my entire life.
I don't feel safe on my streets anymore, and I really hope to see that there will be a change in New York City's overall environment.
Worse than like the 80s?
So maybe not as bad as the 70s, but yeah, I'm not old. Yeah, but it's the 80s. Yeah, I'd say it's getting there.
As a woman, like walking the city lately, it doesn't even feel safe anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
What I find very concerning is, with only days left before the election, why Democrats don't have a better answer, especially on the issue of crime. Any government executive understands that public safety is a top priority. This whole conversation about whether the election should be about inflation and crime or social issues is nonsensical. It's about both, and it has always been about both. The discussion should not be about the question. It should be about the answer. This is like a young student going into an examination and saying, if it's a math question, he can answer it. But if it's a spelling question, he's going to fail. So the plan is to hope for a math question. That is not the answer. The student should be able to do math and know how to spell. There is no choice. Yes, we have to deal with crime and inflation. And yes, we have to deal with these social issues. It's both. The Democratic Party, now is the time to look in the mirror and find out what ghost is haunting them. Pardon the Halloween pun. but the position is not rational. I don't know if some national Democrats feel remorse about the 1994 crime bill, which has been criticized as going too far, and I think it did in many ways. Maybe some Democrats fear rhetorical whiplash after their anti-police language and actions post-George Floyd. Maybe the extreme left and their anthem of defund the police has intimidated responsible Democrats into silence, and now it's the tail wagging the donkey, but it makes no sense. Clearly, Democrats need to be aggressive about fighting crime. You can be progressive on criminal justice and still be responsible on the issue of public safety by keeping dangerous criminals off the street. Some people have to go to jail to keep society safe. I know that sounds harsh, but it's the truth, and everyone knows it, and there is no denying it. This is nothing more than the Democrats creating their own problem. They are entangled in their own rhetoric and their own party politics and the pressure from the extreme left. Look, no governor has been more progressive on criminal justice reform than I have. I closed more prisons than any governor in the history of the state of New York. I legalized recreational marijuana. I raised the age of criminal liability. I provided more alternatives to incarceration than any governor in history. We provided more programs in prison and ended more abuses in prison, such as solitary confinement. And yes, we must address the underlying causes of crime to stop the madness of the cycle. Yes, we must invest in education and opportunity and jobs and community-based programs. That is all true. And that's what we had done here in New York. But I also understand that job one is public safety. And that means enforcement of the law. And that takes police, trained, respectful police. And I increased the number of police and hired more police officers because that was the right thing to do. Again, it's not either or, it's both. Yes, be progressive on criminal justice, but yes, protect public safety. I'd like to see the Democrats stand up and say, we have a real crime problem in communities across the nation. We have cities like San Francisco and New York and Chicago and Atlanta where crime is out of control. And I am committed to keeping you safe. That is my priority. We need more police. We have to get more aggressive and restore the quality of life by keeping our communities safe and clean. Democrats have to say that. And more importantly, they have to do it. Okay, and I think we have time to take a couple of questions. So let's do that.
Hi, Governor Cuomo. My name is Jenny. My husband and I are really enjoying your new podcast. My question for you is, would you be supporting President Biden for re-election? Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, first, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for watching or listening. President Biden, I know President Biden a long time. He is a nice man. I think it's a little early for that decision. We're coming into the midterm elections, which is like the halftime in a game. So there's a whole second half to play. I think it's fair to say that they haven't had a great first half, and we hope that they play better in the second half. But I think that's what's going to depend, for me personally, as to whether or not I would support the president for re-election. Let's see what they do in the second half.
Hi, this is Susan, and I'm calling from Buffalo. My question is, what accomplishments are you most proud of? And what was your most frightening experience as governor? Thank you. Bye.
Oh, that's a lot. My most proud accomplishment. Let me say this. The accomplishments that I'm most proud of did two things. One, affirm the concept of government, that government could work, and two, actually touched people, right? Actually made a difference in people's lives. So things like passing the minimum wage to $15, highest minimum wage in the nation, which means people went from $9 an hour to $15 an hour. That literally put more food on people's table. That was a very big deal. Free college tuition for the middle class, allowed all sorts of students to go to college who couldn't have done it otherwise. Marriage equality was the creation of a civil right, literally a civil right. And marriage equality to me was always about more than just marriage. I used to say kiddingly when I was trying to get it passed, look, I'm divorced, so I'm not the best advocate for marriage. But it was about more than marriage. It was about equality. And this is a generational difference, you know. Now, to be a member of the LGBTQ community, society is much more accepting. When I was growing up, society was not that accepting. And a lot of people felt a lot of pain. And a lot of families were not acknowledging and accepting and respectful. So I saw many people who I grew up with suffer because of their sexual orientation. And what marriage equality said was, government, society is going to take an action that acknowledges you fully. Your relationship is equal to anyone else's relationship. Your love is equal to anyone else's love. So that was very powerful for me. And then the things that touch people, new LaGuardia Airport, new Long Island Railroad track, new Mario Cuomo Bridge, new airports in upstate New York, new tunnels, things that people can see that impact their lives so they know that you actually made their life better, because that's what it's all about. Politics is lousy, especially now. It's a toxic environment. There are a bunch of really unsavory characters. The upside is you can make a difference on a grand scale. And that's what I always try to do. The most frightening moment, Superstorm Sandy, all of COVID, every day of COVID was frightening. Different issue every day. We didn't have masks, we didn't have respirators. There was a time when we were not sure that the emergency workers would come to work. They were frightened. They weren't sure they had the right protective equipment. But if the police, the fire, the bus drivers, the nurses don't come to work, that's a real catastrophe. So COVID writ large. And there was a time when President Trump was talking about blockading New York. This was early on when New York had one of the highest infection rates of COVID, which had nothing to do with us. It's that the planes were landing here, primarily from Europe. But New York did have the highest infection rate. And the president's point was other states didn't want people going from New York to their state. Rhode Island had just put in some program where they were checking New York license plates going into their state. And President Trump said to me directly, he was considering blockading New York. Now you're in science fiction mode, right? Blockading New York means people can't leave New York City. So the federal government would close bridges, close tunnels, close airports, and people would have to stay in New York. I thought that would create a tremendous panic and chaos for the people in New York. And I don't even think it was legal or constitutional, and I don't even think it was feasible. I mean, you would have had physical violence. You would have panicked people to try to get across bridges and tunnels, etc. And the conversation was quite serious. I think what changed the president's mind was, I pointed out very clearly that if you blockade New York, you are going to close the financial markets, and you're going to close Wall Street, and you're going to destabilize those financial markets. And I believe you would have seen the stock market drop dramatically. And you would have seen an economic consequence unlike anything else we had seen heretofore. But that was a frightening moment, I can tell you that. So during COVID, Hurricane Sandy's, natural disasters, those were probably the most frightening. Thank you for asking the question. Keep those questions coming, please. It's my pleasure.